Xin Zhao is one of the premier early game junglers in the game right now, and he brings a ton to the table in terms of both early game prowess and the ability to make high impact plays across the map. Welcome to the Ultimate Guide to Xin, in which I'll be showing you everything you need to know to master this stable jungler in the current metagame. Here's a quick breakdown of how we'll be going over the video. I'll touch on general concepts of Xin's purpose as a champion, and what success looks like in games that you are doing well on him. We'll then discuss different components of his kit, and how we can work better to optimize each one of these. This includes going over different jungle matchups, rune optimizations, ability maxing, your build, pathing, how to play out ganks, and how to play out each phase of the game. But first, if you haven't yet, please subscribe for more content like this, but let's get going. Xin's got pretty good matchups all around, I'd say. His kit is really meant for some pretty aggressive play in the early game, which allows him to really force advantages for himself in the early game as well. With that in mind, his very basic kit also allows him to access all of his damage in most situations with a pretty high level of consistency. He'll still lose in some cases against champions like Rek'Sai, Trundle, or Elise, but against most other junglers, he has a really high level of agency, and you can use that to your advantage. However, we can't underestimate the agency of these other junglers as well, as there's a very good chance that they will also have a similar amount of presence. In these matchups where there's two early game stat sticks against each other, you should treat this as a skill matchup and should play around the enemy's kit or with your laners as appropriate. This early game style is supplemented by your rune set as well. Xin loves going for a Triumph style page these days, highlighted by a Conqueror Keystone rune, followed up by a pretty standard set of runes to follow it up. Triumph, Legend Alacrity or Tenacity, and Last Stand are all good options here, and supplement that dual heavy playstyle. To supplement this core, Xin can either go for an Inspiration or Domination secondary tree. In the current meta, I'd recommend going Inspiration if you want more consistent clears and the benefits of free boots, but Domination's also pretty decent if you need to cause chaos within the game as well. For rune stats, you can follow this up with an attack speed, adaptive force, and resistance rune based on your jungle matchup. Alright, so while Xin is pretty face rolly and easy to understand on the surface, there's some little optimizations you can do just so you're maximizing his potential damage. For older players out there, Xin's W range has been extended greatly, and by hitting it he can now E in from a much further range as well. So the most obvious combo based off of that will of course be leading with W, and then following up with your E, using your Q autos last to maximize your autos and minimize your other cooldowns. Another version of this, if you're already generally in range in a skirmish, is to lead with your E, then use your Q autos to constantly DPS, and once you hit the knockup, you can then use W as a guaranteed amount of follow-up damage. Of course, to tighten this up even further, you can basically use every one of Xin's abilities in between his auto attack windows. Once you gain your ultimate Crescent Guard, there's a couple of mix-ups you can also add to this extra ability to the mix. Itemization on Xin is quite similar to that of other bruiser champions in the game right now, with just a few interesting exceptions here and there to provide for some opportunities to take the game into his own hands. With that in mind, his current playstyle will heavily revolve around using Gore Drinker as his baseline mythic item. Its high sustainability and high value promotes the kind of Chad playstyle that Xin loves to make use of, and is generally a really good fit for what he wants to bring to the table. With Gore Drinker as the core, it also brings about the items that generally go well with it, so think of things like Steric's Gauge, Guardian Angel, Chempunk Chainsword, the list goes on. I will say however that although Xin has pretty high scalings, the items he buys don't have incredible amounts of synergy or scaling in his kit, even when compared to other bruisers in the game in my opinion. With that in mind, I'd say he probably caps out his effectiveness with his items at around 2 or 3 of his core items, and then you start to feel his damage kinda wane out as the game goes on. So although he can benefit from all of these bruiser items and whatnot, we still have to accept that no matter which items that we're going to build or use on Xin, we're still going to fall off in the end. I will mention that there is the potential to navigate around this weakness in his kit slightly in solo queue, since Xin actually has crit scalings as well. Depending on the metagame, another decent option for you is to go something like Immortal Shield Bow as your mythic, and then to actually go for more of a crit build. A common 3 item build in this case would be Shield Bow, Collector, and then Infinity Edge if you literally plan on 1v9ing the game with your damage. Some higher survivability options for the crit build can be things like Bloodthirster or any of the aforementioned bruiser items in order to keep up your frontline capabilities. Xin's got more options than meets the eye. and I think being able to access the full breadth of his itemization capability will take some interesting innovations. Pathing on Xin Zhao can also be pretty powerful based on what matchups you have both in the jungle and in your lanes around the map. Xin's powerful kit allows him to both be really effective with high tempo clears, but can turn up the pace and cause a little more chaos in the game if he needs to. Your initial path should generally be towards the crab that you have a winning matchup in, and the amount of camps you clear to get there can vary depending on whether you're needed for a gank at that very moment. If attempting to full clear, Xin can clear 5 camps and make it in time for the crab at 3:15 in order to get his 6th camp, or if he wants to ramp up, he can do a red raptor's gromp clear or a buff gromp buff clear in order to get hit level 3 and get an earlier gank off that way. After your first clear, you can keep playing for high impact and high tempo plays while getting off more and more clears as you go, but being very fluid and where your clears can lead you will keep your enemies guessing and your allies well supported. The idea behind the strong clears is to get off strong ganks, but in order to get off strong ganks, we need to make sure to know how to gank. So let's quickly brush over the fundamentals to ganking, how we can apply that to Xin's kit, and then use that to our advantage to know how to approach each different ganking scenario. The one I always make sure most players are on the same page with is gank positioning and gap closers in relation to it. We want to start as far back and potentially behind the enemy as possible, and then hold our gap closers until after the fact. A little bit on the contrary to the gank style for Xin, you essentially want to full send yourself to the enemy backline when you're team fighting or playing around objectives on Xin. Your job is to find really quality engages, isolate priority targets like the enemy squishies, and lock them down so your team can melt through them. That's your primary goal here, and Xin has a lot of tools to not only let him into the fight, but to keep him alive once he's in there. You're generally going to poke and prod your way in by using your W, but once you find a decent path into the enemy team, you can use your extended E range in order to dash right into the center of the action. You can then pop your ultimate to not only protect yourself from the enemy's damage, but to also create a huge amount of space and disperse the enemy team. Altering and interrupting their optimal positions here will make it really hard for them to play around their win con in the fight, which also makes your team's job that much easier. After that, you really do have to hope that you've done the best engage you possibly can, because you've basically committed at that point. Just keep smacking the highest priority target you can reach, and if all goes well, you'll be able to come out the fight on top. It sounds like a pretty crazy playstyle, but that is the life when you play a backline diver like Xin. I'd consider the game won or lost on your terms a lot of the time, and I think often this is what actually makes him so enjoyable to play. He's easy to execute on, he can do a lot with his kit, and rewards those who can punish with the power he can bring to the table. It's been a long time since Xin's been powerfully stated in a meta like this, but I hope he'll be a strong staple in the coming times. As always, hope this video helped you all out, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay fresh.